Good evening. It's just about 6 p.m. in the nation's capital. The name of the show is News Views. I'm on every Friday from 6 to 7 p.m. and trying to do my best to anger the people in charge, the people running the empire, trying to tell you some truth, trying to put some information in your hands that will wake some people up to understand what's going on here. I don't know if I can do it, but I can sure give it a shot. Today, we have an important issue, something that's near and dear to my heart. As you probably know if you listen to this show, if I have to say, like, the number one thing in my mind that I work on, in my heart that I oppose, it's imperialism. It's the empire. And here's what I mean. People think they live in a nation. You heard the Ottoman Empire, the Roman Empire, this empire, right? The Mongol Empire. The United States has 850 bases around the world, military bases. What do you think that's for? Let me give you an example. China has 1 in Djibouti. Russia has about 20, most of them right around their borders. The United States has 850. We have 200 bases surrounding China, and we say they're our enemies. Bases encircling Russia, they're our adversaries. AFRICOM, all over Africa, overthrowing countries, doing unthinkable things to the African people, still to this day. And that should be a signal to Americans. This is an empire. This is not a nation. That's why you can't have nice things, because all the money goes out for regime change and war and all that stuff. It doesn't come to you for food and gas and things of that nature. People need to wake up to that reality when they think they're being told the truth. Let's go to Africa, the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia. And for this discussion, I have some brilliant people coming on. I have a very good friend of mine, a brother that's running for Congress, a man that really knows what time it is, the one and only Tedros Fikre. I call him Teddy Fikre. Teddy, welcome back to the show.
What's going on, Garland? Every time we talk, there's always something new that comes up on the screen, on the radar. So I guess this is the latest. I'm glad to be back on your show.
Living in the heart of the empire. Well, number one, I get frustrated because, I feel like this. I've always felt like this. Living in the United States, there's a certain level of guilt because in the United States, we've always had it a little better than it, but people on the outskirts of the empire, because we prey on them like a parasite and we take their stuff. And that's why, might I add, it cost me, say, $2.50 for a pound to buy apples that came from an apple orchard out in Westminster, an hour and 20 minutes from my house. But it cost me 49 cents a pound to buy bananas that came 4,000 miles away in Central America, because we are doing the people wrong and stealing their resources. Now, President Biden, a person, he's supposed to be the next FDR. He's a great guy. It's time for diplomacy. Now there was an election in Somalia. Before the election was decided, there were troops in the air from Germany headed for Somalia, and I got a bad feeling that they're there to support the fascist TPLF, the Tigray People's Liberation Front in Ethiopia, and they're up to no good. Teddy, for the people that are listening that don't know the background, what do they need to know about this situation? What do they need to know about Ethiopia?
Sure. Let me preface this conversation, by the way. I'm going to convey this story in a way that Americans will be able to really, it hits home. First and foremost, I'm running for Congress here in Virginia's 8th Congressional District. So I'm going to talk about this in a way, even though I'm originally from Ethiopia. So this hits home in many different ways to me. But not only as an Ethiopian, but as an American, as a human being. So let me kind of preface this by actually talking about why this matters to Americans. Look, we've been in a continuous state of war for over 50 years. And these wars are fought in the name of democracy. And what they end up creating is fascism, extremism, that ends up creating more destabilization that requires yet more armaments and more wars. It's a never-ending cycle that benefits the military-industrial complex, which actually, Eisenhower a long time ago, he left out one part he was going to mention. He was told to take out, which is the military-industrial governmental complex. This is our government is intricately involved in this, and so what we're seeing is more strife and poverty overseas, and our youngest and bravest coming back home, being broken by wars. If you, I'm right outside of D.C. in Alexandria. You can't go a step in D.C. without seeing homelessness everywhere. Not only D.C. and in towns and cities across America. I know because I was homeless for 2 years in 2015. So these things have real life consequences. And so what we're seeing now, now it kind of makes sense. If in fact what I've heard is true, that there's a new, they're drumming up the talking points of I stand with Ethiopia. Let me tell you, this is the winds of war. That kind of puts into perspective and stark relief what's taking place in Somalia when troops were deployed back into Somalia. About 2 years ago, Joe Biden went in front of the UN and basically declared, it was a declaration of war against Ethiopia. And so, this country that has suffered tremendously under 27 years of ethno-fascist dictatorship, the TPLF revived apartheid in Ethiopia. There was a copy and paste of what the racist South African governor, the Afrikaner government, and the South Africa implemented in the 1950s and lasted until the 1990s. It was a copy and paste where you had ethnic homelands. In South Africa, they called them Bantustans. In Ethiopia, they call them ethnic homelands. And they conditioned people to look at themselves not as human beings, not as Ethiopians, but as tribe. And I'll talk about this shortly, but it's the same type of toxic and poisonous tribalism that is infesting America, where they can condition people who are powerless and helpless and hopeless to fight other people who are powerless, hopeless, and helpless. So, and now we're looking potentially at who knows, if this continues down this path, they're going to try to use TPLF. They've been trying for 2 years now to turn the very TPLF that were committed genocides in Ethiopia, who were, but the U.S. State Department themselves called them a terrorist group. They've now, under 2 years of marketing, thanks in large part to mainstream media, they're now paving the way to potentially bomb Ethiopia in the name of humanitarianism. Well, this is yet another, who knows, another atrocity being committed in the name of profiteering.
Well, let me add this. It makes sense, and here's why. The United States created in Afghanistan in the 1980s, they called it the Mujahideen. There was a guy by the name of Osama bin Laden. The United States created that organization, funded and trained that organization, a terrorist Islamist jihadi organization, created them. The United States used them in Syria and throughout the Middle East and funded them. If anybody doesn't believe me, just look it up. Look up Stop Arming Terrorism Act. Tulsi Gabbard literally had to file a bill to try to get the United States to stop funding ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and it didn't work. Look at what's going on right now in Ukraine. The United States is literally arming and funding Nazis, people who are walking around with Nazi patches on, with Nazi, tattoos all over their bodies, goose stepping, yelling Sieg Heil, and making excuses for them. And the TPLF, from what I know of them, they are no better. They ruled Ethiopia for all these years. I have to apologize to somebody. I do. I wish I could remember. His name was, I can't remember his name. But at any rate, he used to call into this show, and the people that have been listening to me for years will know. He called into this show for years. He called into WPFW all the time. And he was a driver of some type. He was Ethiopian. And he would always scream and rant about the dictator in Ethiopia. I didn't know what he was talking about, but he was talking about the TPLF. And now in hindsight, I wish I could call him to apologize for him. Yeah. I didn't give him a hard time, but I just kind of laughed it off because every week it was the dictator in Ethiopia, the dictator in Ethiopia. And now I look at it, I'm like, I should have been on it, because what was going on under the TPLF was criminal. And now the United States, after the people of Ethiopia rose up in democracy and was able to replace that government, under Joe Biden, the United States appears poised to make an effort to try to overthrow the government and put him back in. Do you think I'm wrong?
No, I mean, this is where it's most likely heading. And by the way, like I said, I speak about these things as an Ethiopian American, and because I'm running for Congress, I look at it also from the America's interest. America's interest is not to continue, these festering wars that never end. That never end. It's kind of ironic. A couple of days ago, George Bush spoke out, and he had a stream of conscience where he talked about something to the effect of a madman invading Iraq. Well, he meant to say Ukraine.
Yeah, yes.
So, I will quote. Let me quote Smedley Butler. He's actually one of the most decorated military veterans. He was a former Major General of the United States Marine Corps, and he said, I quote, "War is just a racket. A racket is best described, I believe, as something that is not what it seems to the majority of people. Only a small inside group knows what it's about. It's conducted for the benefit of a very few at the expense of the masses." And this speech he gave, this is 12 years before, 10 years before the U.S. got involved into World War II. War after war, bloodshed after bloodshed. There's only one side that keeps winning and smiling through all of it, and that's the people that manufacture the weapons and the politicians who are under their payroll. It never ends. And again, my fellow Americans, 9/11 taught us what goes on overseas echoes back here. And so if it's not in the form of a plane that blows up buildings, and it's in the form of blown out human beings that come back from these wars, broken by PTSD. There's a veteran that commits suicide every 27 minutes, I believe. Just think about that. Every 27 minutes, they go overseas, fight for a war that is not about democracy and freedom. Democracy and freedom is about freedom. It's not about it being opposed. And to be honest, if we're going to talk about democracy, let's practice it here. I'm running as an independent for a reason. These two political parties it's a duopoly. They monopolize power and they prevent competition. This is not a democracy. This is not a representative democracy. Now, the opponent that I'm running against is worth $124 million. That is not that doesn't represent me. That does not resemble his constituents. And that's what goes on across America, where you have a bunch of millionaires working for billionaires. Meanwhile, the countries we keep blowing up in the name of profiteering, what's going on with Afghanistan? After 20 years, we left the country broken. The Taliban is back in power and is right back to status quo. What are we doing exactly? And now we're talking about, potentially, bombing a country, a biblical country by the name of Ethiopia that never attacked us. And it's under the guise of humanitarianism. It's astounding. I forgot who said this, never let a crisis go to waste. Here's another made-up crisis that they actually created, and now in order to solve the crisis, they're going to use bombs to do so. And so I highly implore my fellow Americans to keep an eye out about what's taking place in Somalia and in the Horn of Africa, because we're looking at the next potential conflict before it happens. And we could always rage against these wars ex post facto. Let's do so in advance and say no. Call your congressman, call the White House and say enough. No more of these wars. How many more wars? How about here's an idea. Why don't we follow the advice of George Washington and stop trying to be the police of the world and be a fireman to our country and put out the fires here. The fires of homelessness, inflation that's run amok, rent that's out of control, healthcare costs that is through the roof. Meanwhile, we have enough money to come up with $40 billion to supposedly in the name of Ukraine. That's not going to Ukraine. That's going to Raytheon, and that's going to Boeing, and that's going to Northrop Grumman.
Let me add this, and this is a perfect example. The United States will say whatever, they will say we're there to bring democracy to Ukraine. To whatever. It doesn't matter what country it is, but Ethiopia, right? We're there to bring democracy to Ethiopia. We're there to bring, to protect them from violence and the other one, humanitarian something or other. There's always laws, right? Right now, here's a perfect example. What's going on in Ukraine? There's a war going on in Ukraine, and for the Americans that aren't brainwashed by the propaganda here, they understand the United States started that war. People think it started on the 28th or 24th of February. It's been going on since 2014. 16,000 people died in that before this latest phase of it even started. And it's the U.S. who is behind that. It's not just me. John Mearsheimer said it. Even Henry Kissinger, of all people, said, yeah, pretty much it's because the U.S. was expanding at Russia's border. So here's my point. So the U.S. right now has this so-called proxy war just wasting the lives of Ukrainians away so they can get Russia. We're going to fix Russia. And in doing it, we're going to use the Ukrainians' lives for cannon fodder so they can get slaughtered and Russians can get slaughtered and the U.S. can stay home and rub their hands together and hand money to their buddies. That's their plan for Somalia. That's their plan for Ethiopia. That part of it, I believe, and you tell me what you think. Sure. I think part of it is where Ethiopia sits there, there's Eritrea, there's the Red Sea, there's the Bab al-Mandab Straits. It's geostrategically located. The U.S. doesn't care about the people of Ethiopia. In fact, the U.S. wants to thwart democracy in Ethiopia. The people of Ethiopia have decided that they don't want these fascist, violent, genocidal people in charge. And now that they have got independence, that's what the United States doesn't want an African country like Ethiopia to have, is independence. Because then if they want to make a deal with Russia, if they want to make a deal with China, whatever they want to do, they can do it. And I think that's exactly the problem. I believe we have a caller. Hermela, are you on? You have a caller? Are you on? Okay, let's try it. Are you there, caller?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah.
Oh, and just so you'll know, I'm standing. So for our engineer to know, I'm standing by. Hermela Aragawi is supposed to be calling in. Hope to hear from her very, very soon. All right, go ahead, caller. You have a comment or a question for Teddy?
Brother Garland, it's Leo calling from Silver Spring, Maryland. I actually have a comment to make to Teddy Fikre. Since I'm actually of Ethiopian descent myself, I just want to say, kudos to Teddy, and I just want to wish him the best in his campaign. And I just want to also, say kudos to the statements he made, and it's true. It's true. What he's saying is like 100% correct. I do feel like the U.S. is, coming up with all these excuses to basically dominate and show, wants to dominate, wants to become on top of the world, and while its people are struggling, seeing a lot of financial struggles, gas prices going up, the fact that a lot of people are struggling, and I do want to express my admiration.
Hey, we're on the show.
Okay, I was trying to call the line that you sent me, but it's busy.
1 second. Okay, go ahead. Believe it or not, I've got Hermela on another line right now. I'm trying to get her on in a second. She's trying to call in, but our line is busy. At any rate, so Teddy, go ahead and answer Leo. I'll try to get this straight.
Yeah, let me be in a position to defend America, because let me say it this way: this is not America doing this. This is a hijacking of a government by globalist interests. We have lost our sovereignty as Americans. The vast majority of Americans do not want wars. They've been saying no more to war for a very long time. The vast majority of Americans have had it with this endless war of terror. So this is not America doing this. This is bureaucrats and overseas who have basically nullified the Constitution, eviscerated self-government, and replaced it with government by overseas and by fiat. So again, I'm running for Congress because of this as an independent, because both parties are vestiges of globalist interest. The check of one billionaire vitiates the voices of hundreds of millions of Americans. Voting in this way has become almost a very symbolic gesture. So I love America through and through. It's in the interest of America and the national interest of America to declare our independence from these fascist globalists who are intent on consolidating power, not only nationally, but on a global scale, and do so at the cost of humanity. So we need to wake up. The same thing's happening over in the UK and France. People have lost their voice and their right, and we're being governed by tyrants, essentially. So
Teddy. Here's the thing too that's interesting. We're talking about a government. We're saying, they usurped the democracy, which they overthrew the government in Ukraine. But we could go. They just overthrew the U.S. Most Americans don't even know the U.S. was just involved in the overthrowing the government in Burkina Faso. The guy who overthrew the government in Burkina Faso in Africa was actually training with AFRICOM, the African Command. He was training. He went on a break and he overthrew the government. On break. That's how bad the United States is. So the reality is Americans don't even know that their government, that the Biden administration is overthrowing governments all over Africa and trying to play like they're in favor of democracy anywhere. But we also have another guest, a really wonderful person who does a lot of work for Ethiopia, an independent journalist and an activist, Hermela Aragawi. Hermela, welcome to WPFW in Washington, D.C. No, I don't think do we have her?
No, this is not Hermela.
Oh, there she is. Perfect. Hermela, welcome to the show.
I don't think is that Hermela?
I think it was.
Hey, this is the beauty of live radio.
Yeah, you never know what's going to happen. Hopefully, we're trying to get her.
No, I'm sorry. This is not Hermela, but I'll hold.
Okay.
Hey, at least now you know this is not scripted like MSNBC.
Exactly. We're working on this because it's important.
I got her now.
Okay, there you go. Hermela, are you on?
Yes, I am.
Wonderful.
Hey, everybody.
Well, we have a caller, and we do want to respect our caller. So let's put our caller first. Caller, do you have a question or a comment before we go to Hermela?
I think I lost her.
All right, caller, you're on.
Yeah, I think I lost her.
Okay, no problem. We lost our caller. Well, that's fine because we've got Teddy Fikre, we've got Hermela Aragawi, and, I feel humbled in the presence of these two great people. Hermela, how are you? Thanks for calling in from California.
Garland, I am so good. So great to be with you. How are you?
Great. Well, I kind of stumbled out of the starting blocks here at first, but Teddy and I have been having a great conversation. And, I don't know if you heard what we were talking about. The Biden administration has sent troops to Somalia, and let's just say this, back to Somalia. The Trump administration had taken the U.S. troops out of Somalia, and I have great concern that these troops may be used for some nefarious activity involving the TPLF in Ethiopia. Do you think my concerns are warranted?
I do think they're warranted. So the president of Somalia that was recently elected is actually the same president that was in power for a very long time under the TPLF, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, which is the ethno-fascist group that was running the government of Ethiopia for 27 years. So ethno-fascist meaning one ethnicity should dominate. They believe that one ethnicity should dominate the country as well as have undue power over the region. So yes, we've spoken to people from Somalia who have said this election was rigged. It was bought out. There were people, it was a parliamentary election, so people within parliament were paid, good U.S. dollars to vote for Hassan as opposed to Farmajo, which is a very popular president in Somalia. And so, yeah, the concern is very real in terms of how much of a puppet that he is going to be, based on precedent. How much of a puppet he'll be for the U.S. based on how he was before.
I have one more question, a quick question for you, and that is, one of the names that we hear that a lot of people relate to Ethiopia is the guy who is the head of the World Health Organization, the WHO. I have recently found out through Teddy and Thomas Mountain and other people that this man was one of the people involved in that he was in fact an official with the Tigray People's Liberation Front, the TPLF, and has been at least implicated in doing some very bad things. If you could fill us in.
Yeah, so I'll start by saying not all skin folk are kinfolk. It really, there's a lot of Ethiopians that advocated for him to get into that position because there was a sense of pride that an Ethiopian was going to be in that position. But the reality has been that he's done a lot of damage to the people of the Horn through his position. So most recently during this conflict, two longtime UN officials, so two women, two black women, one of them is from Kenya. I think they might actually both be Kenyan, but one is based in New York, one was based out of Nairobi. They both were saying in leaked audio recordings that he, Dr. Tedros, of the head of the World Health Organization, was actually taking charge of the humanitarian aid that was coming through the UN in order to send it to the rebels, so the Tigray People Liberation Front, the rebels that were fighting the Ethiopian people and the Ethiopian government that started this war that has been absolutely devastating for all of the Horn, but most especially for the people in Tigray who are at this point, a year and a half into the war, they are also starting to realize what this war is about, that it's about this elite group getting it back into power. So they have not wanted to put their lives on the line for that, and so they've been forced into conscription. They are, forced to give up a child or two or three in order to be able to get aid, and give up a child for war in order to be able to get the aid. So, I say recently, I always get very nervous when imperialists start to say, first black this, first black woman this, first black man this, because it's scary what they're able to do when they have the face of a black woman or a black man, on something, on a policy point, on a piece of legislation. They're able to get away with a lot more when they have that, as opposed to having a white face. So Dr. Tedros is very much exemplary of that. He is somebody that most of Africa, or a lot of Africans, were really championing in the beginning, because it's like, wow, that's great. Like, we have an African, an Ethiopian at the head of WHO, but there's been so many accusations that I can't even get into because I just don't have the bandwidth in terms of like how much data I've been able to research. But I can tell you, in terms of this conflict in Ethiopia, he's been orchestrating humanitarian aid to go to these rebels that are fighting the entire Horn of Africa, as opposed to going to civilians in Tigray who are desperately in need of this aid. There are now pictures and videos emerging of people in Tigray starving. I mean, they just don't have any energy to expend. Like, that's what starvation looks like. You see people that are just, oh God, it's so painful. Honestly, it is so painful. My family's from there. Both of my parents were born and grew up in Tigray, and a lot of my extended family is there. And it's so painful to see the rest of the world advocating on the wrong side of things. Definitely highlighting some of the pain and suffering that's happening in Tigray, but advocating about it in a way that's actually uplifting the very people, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, that are putting the people into this position. It's I just urge all black folks around the world to realize what you see on CNN and New York Times is not the reality of things, that we as a black people in Africa are not just destined to be this way. We're this way, and we're in these conflicts because there's so much imperialist intervention and interference that happens in these countries. There's a lot of arming the very separatist and terrorist groups that are trying to undo the country. So if we have a more united front, not just in Ethiopia, but in the rest of Africa, and not just in Africa, but in all of the global sphere, that realizes that Ethiopia is not in famine just because it's like that's just what our destiny is. No, it's not. That's not the case. The case is that we as black people outside of Africa unintentionally perpetuate the very systems that keep Africans subjugated. And our struggle here as black people in the United States is very much connected to the struggle of Africans on the African continent.
Let me read this, Teddy. Teddy, let me read something and get your comment. This is an article from November 27th of 2021, so just a few short months ago. Video footage has emerged of several Western. For those of you who think I may be making this up, let me read this article. You can find it yourself, search it online. Video footage has emerged of several Western diplomats meeting with the leaders of the Tigray People's Liberation Front, TPLF, showing them frankly discussing plans to overthrow Ethiopia's democratically elected president. Top U.S., U.K., and European diplomats with long-standing connections to Ethiopia during its 27 years of TPLF rule met on Zoom with a chief representatives of the TPLF, trading ideas about the group's potential to seize power and the Ethiopian National Defense Force ability to stop it. It says, this meeting comes as Western states continue to posture themselves as neutral in the conflict, and while the Biden administration puts heavy pressure on Abiy's government, applying economic sanctions to Addis Ababa and its Eritrean allies for supposedly exacerbating it. Start with you. Your thoughts on that, Teddy?
Yeah, actually, let me just, if I could piggyback on what Hermela said. This noxious identity politics, where you present diversity in executive rooms, in country clubs, in the halls of power, and present that as progress for the rest of the people. Meanwhile, the rest of the people are suffering, are either going to sleep at night hungry, homeless, feeling more and more hopeless. The middle class is being eviscerated. The working class is being turned into the working poor. But we're supposed to be happy that we have a left-handed, bilingual black lady that's in Congress now, or the head of who. It's like if only they thought about this hustle and they made the captain of the Amistad a black man, then slavery would have kept going, I guess. It's very pernicious what they're doing. And so this is happening in Ethiopia. Dr. Theodros is an example of that, like Hermela said. This man, the list of crimes on he rivals Ted Bundy in terms of his rap sheet. He literally was at the head of the Ministry of Health, while ethnic Amaras, for example, were being sterilized. Yeah, you heard that right. Women were being forced sterilized in Ethiopia under his watch. There was a genocide in Anwar under his watch. There were a cholera outbreak that happened under his watch, where he denied it. This man is the head of the World Health Organization is astounding. But it goes to show, if you're connected, if you know people like Bill Gates, then you have the golden ticket to eat for the rest of your life. And this is the same thing that they're doing to us here in America too. They present a brown face or a black face, and they say, look, first such and such, and we're supposed to be happy with that. Same thing just happened right now with the Supreme Court justice. Look, I don't care about the advances or the achievements of some Chablis sipping, caviar eating elites in D.C. or in the Hamptons or in Hollywood. What I care about is the last black child or brown child or white child, irrespective of our differences, going to sleep at night hungry. The last child that has to be raised in a homeless shelter. The last child that has to cry because his mom or her dad died in a drug war. These are the things we measure the health of society not by the attainments of the few at the top, but by the plight and the circumstance of the least among us. The least. And when I say the least, I'm not talking about the value of a life, because we're all equal when it comes to this, but the least in terms of what they're able to attain in life. This is how we should measure life, the advancement or the progress of society, not through the full progress of the squad in D.C. or some right-wing demigod that tries to pretend that he or she speaks for the pains of the people, but through the circumstances or the lived reality of people who are struggling to make ends meet. So we need to really get away from this toxic identity politics. That is, it's really what I will say, to kind of pivot back to American politics for a second. I see both Democrats, Republicans in this way as equally evil, but there's something to be said about what Democrats are doing as a party, where they leverage the pains of African Americans specifically and marginalized communities writ large, and they not to address the issues that cause generational poverty, that cause crime or hopelessness or suicide or mental, all these issues that are byproducts of generations of systematic racism and systemic racism, not to address those issues, but to defend themselves and to vilify their so-called opponents, and to, at the end of the day, to keep the status quo in place. We need to break away from the duopoly because, like Malcolm X said, Republicans are like wolves, Democrats are like foxes. The only difference is Democrats just smile at you before they eat you. I'm not talking about people that vote for Democrats, by the way. Let me make that distinction very clear. Neither am I talking about people that vote for Republicans. I'm talking about the parties, the institutions themselves. They have proven over decades that they are not interested in the well-being of Americans. To the contrary, they are interested in representing the interest of billionaires and multinational corporations like Amazon. Let me tell you, Amazon, Walmart, ExxonMobil, they have no loyalty to America and no loyalty to humanity, period. Their only loyalty is to the bottom line and to their bonus checks at the end of every quarter. We are literally following these social paths down into the abyss. So we need to get away from these people because these are the same people who have been creating wars for decades, who are now ginning up another war in Ethiopia that might take the lives of I don't know how many countless of tens of thousands of Ethiopians if there's a bombing going that's initiated.
Hermela, are you familiar with the story that I just covered about the leaked Zoom meeting? It also says, according to investigative journalist Jeff Pierce, the video was shot on a phone camera by an unnamed participant in the meeting and given to him. The source said the message was held under the auspices of the Peace and Development Center International. It goes on to say, on the center's website, its partners are the U.S. Agency for International Development, which is part of the U.S. State Department, and the National Endowment for Democracy, which is part of which is a self-admitted CIA front. So it sounds to me like they were having a Zoom meeting as they lie to the American people and say our government stands for democracy, stands for the betterment of people or whatever. They're on a Zoom meeting plotting to overthrow the democratically elected government, plotting with a terrorist organization to usurp democracy in Ethiopia. Are you familiar with that story, Hermela?
Yes. So, Garland, not only were they plotting to overthrow the federal government of Ethiopia, which has been democratically elected for 5 years, but they assumed that it was already overthrown, that it was like impending. The way that Dr. Eleni Gebremedhin, I don't know her personally, hope she's able to do a little bit of soul searching and realize what she was doing is actually against her own country and against the entire continent of Africa. But what we saw in that Zoom meeting was her and others, Ethiopians, Africans, along with other politicians, many of them retired from the U.S. front, basically planning a post-Abiy Ahmed Ethiopia. Abiy Ahmed is the Prime Minister of Ethiopia. He's been elected for that position for a 5-year term because that's what Ethiopia decided it's going to do. It's going to do 5-year terms. And the idea that we can overthrow him violently as opposed to waiting, just the way that we do in the United States, waiting for that term to be over and then electing the next president or prime minister is an idea that's made for Africa, right? It's made for Africa. So what you mentioned, Garland, earlier about these so-called ethnic representatives in the U.S. Capitol, who stood up there during a press conference with the Reuters and New York Times and all of these so-called credible organizations, giving them credibility. They got on that mic. Thank God. Like, God was giving that to us, making it that black and white. They got on that mic and said, we are here as representatives that are going to violently overthrow the Ethiopian government. We're going to overthrow the democratically elected Ethiopian government either through violence or diplomacy. So we just all have to go back to the basics. If we heard that in the United States, what would we say? And that same thing we would say, we need to be able to say to a country on the African continent, because people there also voted for their government. Ethiopia has never had a democratic election. The way that the Tigray People's Liberation Front came into power in 1991 was simply an overthrow of the previous communist regime. Fine. During that era, a lot of governments were created in that way. And a lot of Ethiopians accepted and in some ways welcomed the TPLF, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, because they were so sick of the blood that was being spilt under that communist government before it, right? So they welcomed this ethno-fascist group, not understanding how ethno-fascist they were in their roots, right? So that's one. So whatever judgments you have about countries on the African continent, please make sure it's consistent with the way that you look at the United States. Because if it's not consistent, then we as black people here in the United States are doing exactly what racist people here do to black folks here in the United States, right? So we're social justice oriented, we're anti-white supremacist systems, etc. here on the United States, and then we look at continents on the countries rather on the African continent, and we see these kind of press conferences. We go, okay, that's normal. That's not normal. The people there voted for their government the same way that we vote for our government. So that's one. So I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that was a sick joke. In November, or I think it was early December, when these so-called ethnic representatives were on Capitol Hill announcing that they were going to overthrow the democratically elected government of Ethiopia, we were all like, seriously? Like, this is being accepted here in the United States? And the reason it's accepted is because black folk here don't understand the connections in terms of the struggle on the African continent. That's it. I do not expect white people. I do expect a little more from white liberals, but not so much anymore. Good luck with that. I know. Trust me, I know. It's been rough. But black folk here, I expect more from us. And it's not a judgment call or anything like that, but I'm imploring people to look deeper. If we believe in ourselves here in the United States as black people, as people that can decide what is good for them, then we need to have that same energy for black people on the African continent. If we see us differently as the people on the African continent, then we're not really helping the cause. One. Two, and then one more thing I'm going to say about, we have faced so much censorship. So #NoMore, the movement, has faced so much censorship on Twitter. So I am not on my own in this cause, and it originated in Ethiopia and Eritrea and the Horn of Africa and Somalia, but it really is a much global cause because I'm also very much American. So two of my partners, like my main partners, Simon Tesfamariam, Nebiyu Asta, have both been deplatformed off Twitter for no explicable, we still don't understand why they took them down. Right?
Oh, trust me, Hermala, trust me, I understand why they took them down. It's dissent against the empire. They will lie. They will say dissent. We got to have a disinformation government board. They'll do all kinds of lying. But in the end, the truth is they took them off because they were pushing back against the evil of imperialism. They want to overthrow a government, and you and your compatriots We're working to stop them from overthrowing that government, and that's why they threw them off. And then they'll just lie and say, well, they were...
Recently, a black person, actually an Ethiopian person, who basically co-signed this idea of a disinformation governance board that is created by the government. And I was like, are you crazy? The idea that you think that the government, like a government, should have the final say on what is fact and untrue is literally the definition of fascism, first of all. And as a black person in the United States, you should not be for that. You should not be for that. We launched the hashtag No More movement in November of last year, commemorating the 1-year anniversary of the war in Ethiopia that has killed so many of our family members and friends and countrymen and women. We launched that on November, I believe it was late November 1st, and by November 5th, Garland, Twitter had disabled trends in Ethiopia and Kenya, and I believe Uganda may have been in it too. And it was because we were calling out what was not just an Ethiopian issue, but a larger issue of disinformation about people that are black, whether they're on the African continent or not, and that was causing so much division for people on the ground and for those of us in the diaspora. And for those on the ground, it was life or death. When you tell me one ethnicity is more important or more truthful than the other, then what's the other? And if they're coming after us to kill us, what's going to happen on the ground? You're going to have that ethnicity actually killing each other, right? I mean, it's honestly so insane. So it's as if like we're in America and we're basically told light skin, dark skin war, right? Like those of us who are light skin are under attack for those of us who are dark skinned, and we basically have to fend for ourselves because there's going to be a genocide of light skinned African Americans.
That's the oldest trick in the book.
Please take that stupid ass like energy into what you think about Ethiopia, because that's literally what they're trying to do with us. We're family members in one family. My mother's side of the family, they run the gamut on complexion, right? Because it doesn't matter. Like it's just a genetic issue. Like it's not even an issue. It's literally like my mom is super light skinned. I've got other her brothers and sisters who are super dark skinned, and we're all a part of the same family because it's literally just like a toss-up. It has nothing to do with who you are as a person, the value. There's actually scientific evidence that says the more melanin you have, the more you're protected in other ways. So they're actually flipping the whole thing.
Let me throw something at Teddy. Teddy, you are running for Congress, obviously, and you are Ethiopian. And one of the things we've discussed is, where is the black leadership class? Let me tell you where they are, safely in the pocket of imperialism. Representative Gregory W. Meeks, Democrat, New York, last time I checked he was black, has introduced a bill, and it's called the Countering Malign Russian Activities in Africa Act. This bill requires the Department of State to report to Congress a strategy and implementation plan outlining U.S. efforts to, quote, counter Russian malign influence and activities in Africa. That is an imperialist bill. That's a bill that says the United States doesn't like Russia. Therefore, the Africans are not allowed to sign a bill, a deal for wheat or gas or selling or buying something, no matter how much it benefits them, because the United States has to go in there and destroy the lives of the Africans. The African people are not poor because Africa is a poor country. They're poor because Africa is an extremely rich country, and they are being robbed of their resources. The empire wouldn't be there if they were poor. The empire is there because there's gold and everything they could possibly dream of in Africa. What do you think about Representative Gregory Meeks, a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, writing a bill that says the U.S. State Department now gets to oversee Africa like their children? children. That's what the slave owners said during the Confederate times. Well, the black people are just childish kind of people, and we have to parent over them. Teddy, your thoughts?
Yeah, I forgot which coach said they are who we thought they are. He is who we think he is. Look, black leadership in America went away a long time ago. To be honest with you, at least if you see them on TV, if you see them for the most part, if you see a check mark by them, think twice. For me, one of my all-time heroes, the more I reflect upon what he did, was Fred Hampton. Fred Hampton was a revolutionary, not in an extremist way, but in the way that he thought. And so what he did in the 1960s, when he sat down with the Young Patriots organization, which in today's terms would be called a white supremacist group, and convinced them that the plight of poor whites and poor blacks were intertwined, which they are, and actually they made an allegiance. And there's a picture of them with a Black Panther Party flag on one side and a Confederate flag on the other side. Just think about how powerful that is.
That's why they had to kill him.
Of course. And then when they did the movie about him, they left that part of the narrative out. And the same thing about Malcolm X. Malcolm X was beloved as long as he was talking about white devil this, white devil that. He goes to Mecca and came back a changed man and talks about justice that's inclusive. Bang. Martin Luther King was beloved by the so-called liberal establishment, by the mainstream media, as long as he talked about civil rights through the prism of race. The minute that he said, wait a minute, Vietnam War is unjust, and started talking about agitating for inclusive justice and went to Memphis to unite poor whites and poor blacks, bang. So look, the challenge before us is very simple. Of course, being from Ethiopia, the complexion that I am, I'm very proud of that. But I understand injustice does not stop at the color line. And in fact, race was invented by racists. Me as a person of faith, I believe we're all one. Well, actually, faith and science both affirm that we came from one to begin with. Whether that's a big bang or a big God, that's up to your personal belief. Human beings came from one source. We are one big family in this way. Until we understand that concept, which is you cannot, that's irrefutable. We have the same blood in our body that courses through us. We did not come from one planet or the other. We come from one source.
Teddy, we're just about out of time, so before we go, I do want to give each of you a chance. Teddy, where can people go online to find out, to follow you, to find out about your campaign, et cetera?
Sure. Yeah, so they could go to www.Fikre, that's F as in Frank, IKRE, 4, and then V as in Victor, A as in Alpha, like Virginia.com. And social media, across all social media platforms, Fikre, 4, VA. And like I said, I'm running for Congress to represent Virginia's 8th Congressional District for the House of Representatives. And the core message is what I just talked about 2 seconds ago.
Thank you very much.
We have to beyond our divisions.
Hermela, where can people go online to find out more about your what you're doing and your work that you're doing, your activism?
So you can find the work that we're doing at nomore.global. That's our website, nomore.global. You can read more about our mission and what we're about. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, all at Hermela TV, HERMELA TV. And we have a Global Day of Rally coming up on June 5th, Sunday, June 5th. And I implore anyone who's anti-imperialist, who's anti-institutions that are subjugating people of all backgrounds, but particularly people that are black and brown, I implore you guys, please join us in this Global Day of Rally. This is not just an Ethiopian issue. This is not just an African issue. This is a really global issue. Sunday, June 5th, the flyer will come out. Tonight, we'll have more specifics about different cities and locations in the coming days. But please join us. We need to come together. Black Lives Matter, 100%, but Black Lives Matter on its own is not going to be able to do what it needs to do at the core. Same is true for No More, which originated in Africa. We can't do what we really need to do for the people without the global connection. So please join us on June 5th. Check
here's what I'll do. I'll get the information from you, and I'll get you to call in the next show before then, so you can remind people. Okay.
Appreciate you. Thank you
Teddy-
so much. Appreciate
Teddy
everybody's time.
Fikre and Hermela Aragawi, thank you very much for coming on to talk about this important subject. Everyone, make sure you follow me. I got a YouTube show, Garland Nixon on YouTube, Rockfin, Rokfin. It's kind of like YouTube. I do a lot of shows on there, rockfin.com. Please follow me on YouTube. Follow me on Rockfin, ROKFIN.com/Garland Nixon. Just search me on Rockfin. Also, at Garland Nixon on Twitter, and just plain old Garland Nixon on Facebook. My email address, which I give out, is garlandn@gmail.com. Thanks, everybody, and thank my main man, Kalia, for doing a fantastic job. Free Ethiopia. Stand with Ethiopia no more. And it's time for some house music. Peace. I'm out.